Hello to everyone in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and around the world. I'm Dr. Sam Bowden Akbari, Director of Communications at Regional Plan Association, and you're listening to RPA Radio. If you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, maybe you just finished listening to a congestion pricing episode, welcome back. RPA Radio is the official podcast of Regional Plan Association. Here at RPA, we use long-range regional planning to advance quality of life and sustainable urban development in the tri-state region. To kick off our fourth episode, we're launching a new series looking at how the Trump administration's mind-bending swath of executive orders and questionable legal actions impact our regional planning priorities across transportation, housing, and clean energy development. To dive into that latter point, I'm joined by RPA's VP for Energy and the Environment, Rob Freudenberg. Welcome, Rob.
Hey, thanks, Sam. Glad to be here. Glad to kick off this series.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. It's great to have you on. For our listeners, would you give us a little bit of background on your education, your tenure at RPA, the kind of projects that you work on?
Sure. I've been at RPA for over 19 years now. I've been there for a while, but it started off as kind of our junior planner in the environment, and now have the pleasure and honor of directing our energy and environment program with a fantastic team. I came to RPA from the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, where I was a NOAA Coastal Management Fellow, and I was focusing on issues of coastal public access. So the tension between kind of private land ownership and kind of the public right of way of the shore. I got really interested in coastal issues growing up on Long Island. Kind of took that to my undergrad, where I studied environmental biology at SUNY ESF in Syracuse, and then got a master's degree at Columbia's School of International and Public Affairs, focused on, I got an MPA in environmental science and policy. So I come to planning via policy and kind of scientific ecology background.
Nice. And 19 years at RPA is no short tenure, so you're one of our seasoned OGs at the organization, I would say.
For better or for worse, right?
That's true. That's true. Okay, so to set the stage for our listeners, on Trump's first day of office, he issued a lot of executive orders, but one in particular we're going to dive into the implications of is one that halted new federal leases and permits for offshore wind projects to allow federal agencies to review their environmental and economic impacts. That's kind of the stated reason for the executive order. I think we can all say the subtext of it is to slow them down in preference for other less environmentally friendly forms of energy. But Rob, what went through your mind back in April when you first saw the EA come down?
I was really concerned. So I was concerned about the fate of offshore wind renewables in general with the election, but there was some element of hope that maybe with the talk of the need for domestic energy and kind of the America First approach, that maybe kind of a renewable energy industry, a homegrown renewable energy industry, might break through that noise. So when that executive order came in, essentially on day one, it sent, it was clear that this administration was going to target renewable energy, with a particular focus on offshore wind. So I became very concerned for the state of offshore wind, because up to that point, offshore wind was already a struggling industry because of the economic factors. And you can start a new industry and then kind of switch to different energy if you have the right economic and political alignment. And with the economics that were already kind of working against offshore wind, there was already some trouble that had come through. And now with this political focus targeting offshore wind and other renewables, it became clear that this was going to be a fight to keep this industry going.
Yeah, and you mentioned a little bit of the economic challenges for the industry, and I mean, I know coming out of COVID, there were a lot of supply chain issues
Mhm.
for, sourcing parts for construction. Obviously, the interest rates were pretty big barrier for
Yeah.
investment. But can you talk about some of those pre-existing issues the industry was facing before the executive order came down?
So it's important to remember that this nation's push towards offshore wind happened a while ago. Over 10 years ago, New York kind of leading the charge, saying we want offshore wind, and then the country, having these offshore wind lease areas to make available for energy development, there started to become an alignment over 10 years ago. And the lease areas were sold to developers who then said, we're going to commit to developing these sites, and then the states work with those developers to come up with the conditions under which they would develop those sites and deliver energy into the state. So those conditions were set more than 10, or in some cases, as long as 10 years ago, maybe a little less, but they were all set. A number of the projects that we're talking about today were set at right before COVID or right around it. When you make a contract based on the current economic conditions, it's all a little different when the world turns upside down and COVID happens. Supply chain issues happen, inflation jumps up, and you have a war between Russia and Ukraine, where a lot of steel comes from, which is important for this. So all the assumptions that companies had made when they signed those contracts with the states to build this project and deliver this energy became upended. So there were so many other projects kind of ready to go, moving forward, and a number. There's a few things that can happen when the economic conditions change. You can kind of stall your project and hope the conditions get better. You can try to renegotiate the contract terms with the state. Or you can pull out and say this just isn't going to pencil out anymore. And all of the above happened, right? Some projects are stalled. Some projects ask the state to renegotiate the terms. In some cases that worked, particularly in New York. It did not work in New Jersey. And then other projects just said, well, this is too much. We're going to pull out and say this isn't going to work. That happened in Connecticut, that happened in New York, that happened in New Jersey. All states saw canceled projects happen. And there are some projects that are just kind of on permanent vacation right now, hoping that things change. So those conditions really made it challenging for offshore wind, where we were going to have this big boom of projects happen. Kind of became one project to eke through, and that's South Fork Wind, because it had started before COVID, and those assumptions and those contracts still worked out. But all the other projects have been trying to struggle and figure out what to do. So those economic conditions have made it really hard. Some of the renegotiations have allowed other projects to move forward. But then, and then kind of the Inflation Reduction Act really opened up some more opportunities by providing really good credits for these companies to kind of recoup some of their investments through tax credits. And that was kind of the state of things up to the election.
So it's a really good kind of picture into what the headwinds were, what some of the challenges were, how people negotiated it coming into this moment. All right.
Exactly. Yeah, there were headwinds. The strong made it through. The weak didn't. But states were moving forward with future procurements, with future opportunities for companies to say we want to enter into contracts with you to build these projects. So we were at a point where we were kind of steadying the ship. The dust had settled around kind of inflation and supply chain issues, and we were ready to get back to work.
Yeah, there was a little bit of like a up and up coming out of the doldrums, and then this hit. Okay, so given that context, let's dive in a little bit and zoom into New York. There were two offshore wind projects in New York, one called Empire Wind 1 and one is Sunrise Wind. They received their federal permits under the Biden administration and were scheduled to move forward. They had started construction on, a billion-dollar port revitalization project in Brooklyn to support Empire Wind 1. Of course, Empire Wind was developed by a Norwegian wind developer called Equinor. It was slated to begin construction in the ocean in spring of this year off the coast of Long Island. And once finished, it would be able to produce enough energy to power about 500,000 homes. But of course, this executive order threw a wrench into that. What's kind of been the story from April with Empire Wind 1? I know it's been a bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah, Empire Wind One has been through it all, and I think I was quoted somewhere calling it the offshore wind project that could, the little
Yeah.
offshore wind project that could, because it had navigated all this. It pulled through the economic stuff. It got more favorable conditions to develop. It had commitments, strong commitments to develop a port in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, over $1 billion of investment into that port and into that community. Really we're focusing on building kind of offshore wind here at home. And so, the executive order, put everybody on notice that, okay, this is concerning, but the executive order was really focused on projects that hadn't received their permits. They said they would take a look at those and decide if they were harmful. But it really put the freeze on new projects. There was nothing saying that projects that were moving forward and had permits had to stop. They just said they were evaluating them. So, we were all watching with hope the projects that had their permits and were moving forward. That included a project in New Jersey as well called Atlantic Shores. So, we were shocked when the first sign of this after the executive order was that they pulled a clean air permit from a project in New Jersey. And that was kind of like, wow, they're pulling back a permit that the government had given already. And that kind of showed us how far they're willing to go in terms of permits. And we hoped that would be the worst of it, that they say they can pull back permits, but it got worse with Empire Wind 1 because this is a project where they got to work on it. The project was moving forward. People were working, people were showing up at a job every day to build this project, and the government issued a stop work order. In a sense, almost unheard of that the government would do this, saying that they needed to review it and they thought that the environmental impact statement had been rushed through. It's interesting timing that they issued that order the day after the EPA came out and said restrictions on environmental review. And then the next day or a couple days later, they came out and said, we're stopping this project because we don't think it's had a good enough
Yeah.
environmental review. So, that sent a shockwave through multiple industries, in that, when you get the federal government sign off on permits and you get to work on a project, you don't anticipate that the federal government's going to come in and say, stop work on this, and we're pulling permits on it. And so a large effort went into advocating for this project. And in this pulled together, from Governor Hochul to Mayor Adams, to the unions, to the company Equinor itself, to all of us advocates pushing for this. It was a full court press to try and save this project. And I think, at the end of the day, there was some convincing, maybe by the governor, and possibly by the company that this is a good investment, that this is putting people who might have voted for the president to work every day, and that this stop work order hurts them. And at the end of the day, a major reversal happened. Kind of stunning, but they said work can proceed on it, and they lifted the stop work order, and people got back to work, and this project is being built and is expected to come online in 2027.
Great. Okay. So huge unprecedented action. The executive order we thought was just forward looking, but with Empire Wind clawing back something that had already been permitted, work had already begun. That was, a really huge deal. Full court press of advocacy got it back online. So a little bit of like, a lot of bated breath and then a big sigh of relief that it's back on track. So that's great.
And just to jump in there, I mean, for now, right?
Yeah, for now.
If if the government has shown they can go back on their word, they could go back on their word again. I mean, we hope not. We hope that this was a successful negotiation, good politics, interesting things being talked about, kind of what helped get this on track. But politics is hard work, it's crafty work, and seems like this one is moving through.
Good. Okay. Well, fingers crossed. Let's stay hopeful on Empire Wind. And I think it's good to give our listeners kind of a little bit of background for what's driving the push. You mentioned New York is a leader here. And I think it's important to talk about the Climate Leadership Community Protection Act of 2019, the CLCPA, which mandates that New York's required to develop 9 gigawatts of offshore wind produced electricity by 2035, which is enough to power about 6 million homes. And in that mandate, Empire Wind's part of that mix, but there's also an offshore wind project that is operational that you mentioned, South Fork Wind. Could you tell us a little bit about South Fork?
Yeah, South Fork Wind was the first one out of the gate. This was basically intended to be a small pilot project that showed that offshore wind can work here, and it is doing just that. Compared to Empire Wind, which is 810 megawatts, this one's 132 megawatts. So
Mhm.
it gives enough power for about 70,000 homes on Long Island. It's the first commercial scale offshore wind farm in the U.S. So its blades have been spinning for over a year now. April 2024, it started delivering energy into the grid. It's delivering consistent energy at stable prices that were negotiated years ago, not subject to the ups and downs of kind of whatever's going on in the world. It has put over 1,000 people to work across 5 states. And this is particularly good for RPA listeners. It is a regional story. This New York farm that's kind of delivering energy to people on Long Island was built in New London, Connecticut. Touches my heart for the regional story that's part here. Connecticut built a wind farm for New York. And that comes about, the port aspect here is really important, which is that's where offshore wind workers go to work, are at the ports. And Connecticut should be lauded for their insight for saying we're going to need ports in this region to build offshore wind. So they took the leap to build the first port operational to help build these projects. And they continue to build projects up and down the East Coast. So they're currently building parts for a project in Connecticut and Massachusetts and then Connecticut. So that's a really important part of this story as well, that it's not just the blades and the farms out in the ocean, it's the ports on land that really make these things happen and put people to work. So South Fork Wind should be a great story of more to come. I think we're at this kind of delicate space where, it might be a story for what's good for now and hopefully what we can get back to in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point that I hadn't considered about kind of the regional story, the role that Connecticut played in helping, New York set up the first offshore wind operation in the US. And you mentioned the role that ports have to play in, bringing offshore wind, construction, you know, actually having like the infrastructure to, store the energy, bring it to the grid. Rob and his team put out a really great report called Ports of Opportunity, which we'll link to in the show notes. That also has some really great illustrations by our creative director, David Zakin, that really shows, what is happening at the ports, how they need to be prepared. So we'll link to that in the show notes. But given the CLCPA's target, South Fork is producing about 2% of that mandated target. And there's other offshore wind projects, Empire Wind that we mentioned, and Sunrise Wind. They're expected to come online in 2027 rather. And combined, those two projects, once they're operational, would get New York up to 20% of the mandated target. So it's great that South Fork is, operational. Empire Wind is, God willing, online to become operational. But given that port connection, what's the status of Empire Wind now that it's back on track? And what role does the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal play, as a port under development, with the $1 billion investment you mentioned? What role does,
Yeah.
the marine terminal play?
Yeah, so South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, I love this story too because it's a story of a community that fought to keep the port a port, fought to keep the working waterfront a working waterfront against all the major forces that had a different vision for that, prime waterfront site. So a lot of credit goes to people like Elizabeth Yeampierre at Uprose, who galvanized her community to say, we want to keep this space a working space. Even though it sat fallow for years, waiting for the right opportunity to come along, the right opportunity did come along. And as offshore wind, the industry and the state were looking around at places where, you could make sure you have people working in their communities on offshore wind. This South Brooklyn Marine Terminal was one of the key sites identified years ago by the state in their analysis. The ports are the economic opportunity. It is like I said, it's where people go to work. It's also like you mentioned, where things can plug in. But it's going to be the place where things happen and where you can put these projects together, maintain them, operate them, monitor them. They're critically important for the wind farms. And so the private company Equinor, or partially private company Equinor, has committed to invest over $1 billion into developing this port. That work is underway. It will help to build this project and will help to build future projects as well. So these investments are critically important and they flow back into the communities. There's been a lot of work between the company, between the community to find agreements, to find kind of project labor agreements, make sure that people in that community are working at that port. I can't underscore enough the importance of these ports in this puzzle as we're talking about developing an industry. And I think dollars, money spent by the government on these ports, once offshore wind kind of picks up again as an industry, will be dollars well spent. New Jersey's committed to spending almost $1 billion on their wind port. And that's because of the opportunity it presents in the future. So again, in a little bit of a limbo on some of these ports. But for those projects like Empire Wind 1 that are going to be built at these ports, these are dollars well spent, and it flows right back to the community.
Okay, so almost like a two for one here. I mean, we're getting a reduction in, greenhouse gases because we're not burning fossil fuels, but we're also getting jobs. We're also getting investment in, the critical infrastructure in these cities. So it's not just this, push for, renewable energies for the environment's sake, which is critically important. I mean, if you just looking at like the flash floods in Texas, it should be very
Yeah.
clear climate change should be addressed through energy reform, but it's also an economic driver. I think that's a really great point to make here.
Yeah, and as you're talking, like it makes me think, just behind the scenes here, when these announcements come out and we put out statements in reaction to them, and we kind of work together on writing them, I always just shake my head at like, how is it possible that you could try to stop something that has so much benefit? Whether it's the jobs, the economic development in communities, the cleaner air that can come about by shutting off dirty power plants, the reduction in climate impacts that could happen because of this. You couldn't design a better thing with more benefits to it, and to just picture that someone's trying to stop that, it makes me just shake my head at the least every time I kind of think about and write about what these benefits are and what they could be.
Yeah, and even to add another benefit, like you said at the beginning, is energy independence, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we're not dependent on foreign oil, we're not, fracking for coal. This also has, like an energy, even like an American first angle. So you would think it would have broad bipartisan support. And so to see these kind of harebrained actions that don't take into
Yeah.
consideration the really broad swath of benefits is really troubling. And, if we have another development, we'll do another episode on it. But I think that's, a really great point to hit that this isn't just a clean energy project. This is energy independence. This is jobs, this is economic development. This is um should have wide, broad-based support. Um,
Exactly.
okay.
And
So
and
can
and
we,
Sam, just for a second, to bring it back to
yeah.
you raised a great point there, is to bring it back to the CLCPA, right?
Mhm.
And the idea that we are by law supposed to get to 80% reduction, by 2040, I believe it is, and 100% renewables in around the same time frame, right? We have to get there, and there are other conversations going on now because offshore wind was supposed to be such a good chunk of that, and now it's not as clear that we're going to hit those targets. What can we do instead? All the other options at this point are years and years away. You take something like nuclear, that's years and years away and billions of dollars investment. We haven't even started to think about that or plan for that now. Even if you wanted to go for cleaner gas projects, if that was something we had to do, given this administration, those parts are years and years behind. We could not have one a new turbine for those in 8 to 10 years, right? We have these projects planned. We have in some cases the permits for them. We have the commitments and agreements for them. We can build these now, and the other opportunities to kind of reduce or get rid of our emissions are years and years away. So there's the whole idea of kind of what we've already invested in this, what we've already done through the planning and the permitting. Building an offshore wind farm can take up to 10 years from lease area to blade spinning. And we've been putting in that time. And we don't have time to waste and don't have time to kind of consider other options that will be even further out. So just my final push for yet another benefit of offshore wind is the time scale.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good point. Is, not losing the momentum that is already behind this work. Um, okay, so one project is off and running, two more are in the works. Plus, we have the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal prep for Empire Wind 1 that's already ongoing. But let's shift from focus a little bit into Queens. What's going on in Queens?
So in Queens, our friends at Rise Light and Power is one of the oldest, largest peaker plants in the city at Ravenswood Generating Station. So there's a vision. Clint Plummer, who's a board member of RPA, was brought on there to try and rethink what that facility could be. And they came up with this vision called Renewable Ravenswood. And basically, you have a number of reactors running these plants, generators, I should say, not reactors. And they're fossil based. And the idea was that they could plug in at that point, plug in these offshore wind farms, and shut down. Anytime you plug a project in, you could shut down one of the fossil things. It's very clear vision, and then you could build battery storage on that site to kind of hold the energy. So how do you rethink a big, dirty, old, polluting power plant? And they work closely with the community on this vision. And the idea was that you can actually convert this old fossil into the new vision. So, part of what they proposed is that they will build the transmission point, the cable, all the way out to the ocean, to there's a whole series of kind of complex issues here. Is you have state waters and you have federal waters. Offshore wind farms are built in the federal waters, which are 3 or more miles out. Everything before that is state waters. So they had a plan to say, hey, we're gonna build the extension cord out to the federal waters so that when projects come online, they have some place to plug in. Because what good is an offshore wind farm if you can't plug it into the grid? So, that's part of their vision. They put it through. They've been kind of moving through the processes to get there. And as soon as the executive order hit, kind of freezing offshore wind, future offshore wind, and questioning current offshore wind, states have been responding in different ways. They're not sure if offshore wind is really going to be a thing for the foreseeable future. So, one of the things that happened was the state PSC kind of put into question whether this is a good project or not. And I think, more than anything, this just is an illustration of the time we're in, where it's just confusion, and it's upended everything we were pushing for. The state wants to do the right thing. The PSC does the right thing. They do a lot of great work. And they have to question whether this project is worthwhile pushing forward under the current conditions. And then Ravenswood and Rise Light and Power, they're trying to do the right thing by building this. So it really has caused this kind of massive upheaval where things were kind of going down this path, and now we just have to question good projects like that. And one thing that RPA has been trying to do in the wake of all this upheaval is really focus on the grid, focus on transmission, what we say, getting our states offshore wind ready. So we don't think offshore wind is going to go away. You have such great conditions out in the ocean for this domestic, locally grown power. Um, if we, get through these tough political times, we're not that far away from reviving it. The companies want to be here. They want to do business here. The wind wants to blow out there, and we need energy. We need more energy than we've ever needed. And we're only asking more of it as we become more digital and AI and data centers proliferate. So we still think it's a good investment to be getting our states ready for when offshore wind comes back. And that includes projects like this, where you build the transmission so that it's ready to plug in when this kind of fog of uncertainty lifts.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple of key points here that I want to link to RPA work, in the show notes for the episode. One is RPA staffer Mackay Brown with a number of other RPA staffers and RPA members actually toured the Ravenswood site, and we did a deep dive kind of recap of that tour. So we'll link to that if you want to learn more about the Ravenswood site and um, also, you mentioned the rise of data centers and the work that you and Kyle Mason have been doing on that front. And so we'll also link to the rise of data centers in the grid. So you can get, listeners can get a bit of a deep dive on what's going on with data centers and really how energy demands are only increasing. And so being prepared to, plug into the system with, renewable energy to buttress the grid and provide more power is really critical. So we'll link to both of those pieces in the show notes. And if folks want to join RPA as a member, we'll add the link there too. Tours like at Ravenswood are a really great perk of membership. You can learn more about the region and its infrastructure, so I highly recommend that. And if costs are an issue, there's multiple tiers. So if you're a student, if you're an early professional, there's a tiered membership for you that is at a very good price, and you get access to our research as it comes out, but also invitations to tours like these. So we'll link to all of that in the show notes. Okay.
Join today. I
Yeah,
agree.
join today. Okay, so we've spent a fair amount of time looking at cases in New York, but let's zoom out a little bit to the wider tri-state region. What are some of the offshore wind developments in New Jersey and Connecticut? I mean, you mentioned the Connecticut connection, where they, did the work to help build for South Fork. But what should people be thinking about more broadly in the region in New Jersey and Connecticut?
Sure. So, like we talked about, the port in Connecticut is the strongest thing it has going for it. Connecticut's committed to about 2 gigawatts of energy from offshore wind, and frankly, they've been struggling to kind of make projects work given the conditions. They entered into a partnership, a New England partnership with Rhode Island and Massachusetts, I believe, to try and blunt some of the headwinds that were against it. In the end, because they did that partnership, there is a project being built called Revolution Wind. Connecticut will get a small chunk of the energy from that. A bunch more will go to, I think, Massachusetts. So that's what they have going. No other projects in the works right now. And, the way this process works is, the federal government has the lease areas out in the ocean. The developers bid on those, then they have the right to build there. Then they have to work with the states to come up with a specific project. States do that by issuing RFPs essentially, and then they're called solicitation, and they bid into those solicitations, and then the state chooses the one that works the best for them. There's no plans for a new solicitation in well, basically any state right now. I mean, there's talk of potentially a fifth solicitation in New York, but nothing right now. Usually, this was the kind of thing where it was like almost once or twice a year there were new solicitations going out for new projects. That's a bit on ice right now. So, Connecticut has part of one project that they will be tied into. New Jersey really had a rough go with offshore wind. They had multiple projects canceled because of the economic headwinds. They do have two projects, kind of, as I mentioned, one of the options was to kind of try and wait it out, and that's what a couple of projects, their most recent contracted projects are waiting to see if conditions improve. Those would be two projects built way out in the ocean in what's called the Bight, 30 or so miles from shore. You can't even see them at all. But there's been, New Jersey's beach shore communities, I should say, there's been a lot of fighting about these projects because you will be able to see them on some clear days. People are very concerned about their views. And I will say, honestly, the opposition against offshore wind and renewable energy nationally focused in on New Jersey, saw the opportunity there. It was actually at a Trump rally down on the Jersey Shore, where, I think the idea got planted to kind of kill these projects. So New Jersey itself didn't necessarily help matters. One of the projects called Atlantic Shores, which would have been built, would have been under construction now, asked to renegotiate the terms of its contracts, but the state chose not to. Again, this was right around the time of the election, so you could say the political climate wasn't right for renegotiation. So New Jersey is without a project now. They are even trying to figure out if they want to do that, what we were talking about, kind of building the transmission network. They came up with an innovative approach that said, let's build one pathway for these cables to go down in that multiple projects can go into. We'll build it ahead of time and have a place to plug in for multiple projects. We were all very excited about that. It's a good approach because there are fewer communities affected. But that seems to be lagging as well. It's called PBI, pre-build infrastructure, and the state is not moving ahead on that right now. It's before their Board of Public Utilities, and it hasn't yet gotten moved forward. So New Jersey is very much in a holding pattern, and we're working really hard to advocate for and push the state to keep pushing on offshore wind, finish building their wind port, build this pre-built infrastructure, and lay out a blueprint for when they could begin solicitations again. It's a state that needs energy, a state that just saw a significant hike in their rates, and we need stable sources of energy at prices that work for people.
Yeah, and you mentioned the rate hikes. I mean, I feel like 2 points on that. One, you and Kyle Mason, planner at RPA, have a forthcoming report, which, if it's out by the time the episode comes out, we'll link to it in the show notes, diving into the rate hikes issue. But that's something I think consumers should really be more conscientious of, that if they want lower energy prices, supporting these projects, which puts more power onto the grid, can actually reduce prices. So I feel like from a consumer affordability point of view, that is a really strong angle to try to, convince some of these folks. But then on the other hand, you also mentioned the rally that happened at the Jersey Shore when, President Trump was there. And it really just it sparked this idea in my mind that, you know, could you dispel some of the myths that are out there around offshore wind?
Sure.
Be it, there's a lot of kind of like convincing lies that get told about the industry to make people not want to support it. So could you talk about some of the supposed threats or, myths around offshore wind for folks?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I think it was last summer, it was the summer before. There were whales washing up on the beaches. And the opponents saw that as an opportunity to blame offshore wind. So, despite the fact that nothing was being built out in the ocean at that point, they somehow found a way to link the whale deaths to offshore wind. You know, there has been, groups like, NWF, National Wildlife Federation, are huge supporters of offshore wind. Audubon, who care about birds, are
Yeah.
huge fans of offshore wind because, and they weren't always, but they have worked very hard to ensure that marine mammals are protected and that birds are protected, that you're not building these things in the migratory pathways of either birds or whales. And that, it gets down to the level of they have a watcher on any boat that's kind of doing offshore wind work. That's just their job is to look for any signs of animals, marine mammals. And if they see one, they blow a whistle and the boat stops, and everything comes to a halt until that beautiful creature has moved on.
Mm.
So there's a lot of work that's going on to ensure that these are not harmful. What those whale deaths were probably caused by, or well, first, it's a success story because whales are back in our region. It's also a cautionary tale because they're coming in closer to the shore to get their food because we're overfishing. So the real issues there are kind of overfishing and overconsumption because what probably are hitting these are the big things bringing all of our goods that we like to buy so much of. So. That's one myth is kind of the danger to animals, and just one more point on that is there another success story from the South Fork Wind Project is the new reef habitat that's been created under the water from these structures. Creatures in the sea are always just floating around looking for things to hang on to. Offshore wind turbines and their foundations give them something to hang on to. So you're in a way creating a new nursery for life in the ocean with these. So it's almost the opposite of what's been saying. Not that there won't be impact. There's always impact when you develop, but there are huge safeguards to ensure that it's minimal. There's the idea of kind of electromagnetic EMF frequencies. The cables that are carrying the power from the wind turbines are buried deep enough in the sediment that it's about as much EMF as like a toaster oven or something like that.
Mm.
So if you are afraid of your toaster oven, you have the right to be afraid of offshore wind cables. I'm not afraid of my toaster oven. I actually like my toaster oven. So that kind of myth is easily debunked as well. The idea that this will destroy tourism and communities because of you're going to have to bring these cables on shore. They have ways to drill under communities, under beaches. The South Fork Wind Project was almost stopped by wealthy folks in the Hamptons who didn't want them drilling a cable under their beach. But there was no impact. The cable's underneath. Nobody knows any different. And then the if you have to tear open some roads to lay these cables, look around right now, wherever you are. There's a road being torn up for some reason. It's just another reason for that. It's not a major disruption. These things are done thoughtfully and carefully, and that's not an issue as well. And then the view shed issue, the early generation projects, well, offshore wind was going to be a thing decades ago, and that was going to be in state waters. And famously in Martha's Vineyard, the Kennedys and others killed that project because of the view impact, because those would have been so close. So then we moved out into federal waters to get further away. New Jersey would have had the closest one at about 8 or 9 miles offshore. You would have seen them on a clear day, but like little blips, small, small enough. The latest generation of projects are getting further and further out there in the lease areas, 30 miles, 15, 30 miles away, and those you will really not be able to see. So the view shed issue, while it is a real concern, it's been hyped up and made to be worse than it is. So it's one of these instances where public backlash makes projects better. Advocate pushback makes projects better. So now we have safer projects for animals, more productive ecosystems for creatures, and less impact on things like viewshed and the way that disruptions to communities and kind of building these things.
Okay, so I know this series is called Region Watch, but the subsection is certainly called Mythbusters. So thanks for
Let's
the
do it. Yeah.
robust tour of all the ways that these projects have taken in a lot of some well-founded criticisms and have really taken them to heart and embedded protections and considerations. So that's really good for our listeners to know. Okay, so I want to pivot a little bit to um, prepping for when conditions improve. Taking the developments at Ravenswood as an example, how should municipalities, utility companies, private developers, how can they be working together to, prepare for offshore wind, once we get past this moment that we're in?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we put out a report, another potential link here called Making Offshore Wind Transmission Work for Communities," because the real impact of offshore wind development is onshore when you have to get these cables laid down. And yes, it can involve closing roads and opening them and closing them again, and that can be an impact. Some communities will have to host infrastructure like substations, usually done in industrial areas. But there are ways that this can be a win-win for communities. The companies have been very good about working with communities to try and create funds and help advance projects that the communities wanted. If it's done well and these companies work together with the municipal leaders and the communities themselves, you can have good outcomes from these projects. Small disruptions, good outcomes. And I think that's the idea that we should be focusing on now, which is I think we have to believe that offshore wind will be coming back in more force once the political climate changes again, and we should be using this time now to help dispel the myths that you're talking about. Work closely with communities, talk to them. Just because offshore wind might be on a pause for some areas, it doesn't mean the conversations about them about offshore wind development should pause as well. This is actually a good time to reset and get out there and say, hey, this is why this can be good for us. This is why you might want this. And then listen to people. What were they concerned about? Why wouldn't they want this to happen? And work together with them. So, if there's a pause right now, I think that's a good opportunity to get out into communities and talk about all the benefits that we were talking about and how those benefits can actually happen locally.
Yeah, and I not to plug another link into the show notes, but we will. Back in April for the assembly, we hosted a panel called Going Local, Meeting Climate Goals Through State and Local Action, which there's a webinar link that is going to be embedded in the link in the show notes that has a really robust conversation, deep dive into these kind of, listening tours, but also kind of clear actions that, municipalities and agencies can take. So we'll link to that.
Sam, while you're plugging links, we may as well also plug our Propel New York webinar that we did, Next Gen Grid, because that is kind of the story of the grid around offshore wind needing improvements and upgrades as well. If we're changing the way we kind of produce energy, we need to ensure that the grid is accommodating that. So folks should check that out. After listening to this episode, you will not have anything to do with your time but to just read and listen to our stuff.
Yeah, you'll get like a full master's in
Yeah.
preparation for offshore wind. Okay, so turning the bend here from kind of like how the Trump administration threats have impacted the industry, focusing now more on like the clear and present danger posed by the so-called Big Beautiful Bill. It's more like the diabolical and deranged bill. Rob, I know you spoke with Outlet City Limits on this, I think last week, but could you recap for us kind of like what are the E&E threats posed by this bill?
Yeah, the big thing this bill does, it does a lot of things in a lot of areas, but in particular for renewable energy, is it targets the credits that were created by the federal government in the Inflation Reduction Act, which really made developing projects like offshore wind projects or commercial scale, large scale solar projects doable. It's really important to remember that the people developing these projects are private developers. They're private companies or semi-private companies who have shareholders and others that they need to report back to that they're making profit. That's the way our system largely works. And these are the folks with the capital to take the risk to build these projects with the assurance from the government that they'll help and that the contract terms they come to will make this pay and pan out for them. Like it or not, these companies need to be making a profit to develop these projects. Because this is a new industry, because we don't have advantages like having, manufacturers that are here already building it. These companies need a little extra boost to make the numbers work. And that little extra boost was coming by way of renewable energy tax credits from the federal government. So one thing that this bill, now law, does is says, okay, we're going to end those credits. No more tax credits for projects that don't happen in the next year. So basically, the projects that are being built right now, relying and depending on those credits, will still get those credits. And that gets us our Empire One wind project built. That hopefully gets us our Sunrise wind project built because those are expected to come online by 2027. Anything after that, no more tax credits. And I think the quote I said in that piece was this blows a hole through the heart of the industry because that's the future of this industry. Those projects were the beginning, and then we need more. We need more to come in order to get more, to hit our goals, to make our lives better, to make our climate impacts less, to give us jobs. We need that boost from the federal government by way of tax credits to make these projects pencil out. So here we are at a point now where those credits are gone. Unless you've started a project in the next year, or unless you're able to bring power to the grid by 2027, those credits are no longer available. And that I think just puts a lot of question marks in a lot of those calculations that companies are doing to see if they can make this work. So if it wasn't enough before that the federal government said they will not give any new permits to these projects, which essentially freezes them, those projects with permits that are kind of underway but may not be built by a certain time are really going to have to question. So we're closing off, they're closing off the spigot for new projects, and really making it hard from a permitting standpoint and now an economic standpoint, which really hurts things for the time being.
Yeah, I think the dollar and cents calculations now are even harder than they were, before this. But going from like that kind of like industrial dollar and cents view down to like the individual homeowner, how are everyday kind of homeowners impacted by this? Because it's not just money for, the industry to help offset their costs. Doesn't it also impact homeowners?
Yeah, if you wanted to put solar panels on your roof or if you wanted to buy an electric vehicle, that's going to become a lot harder to do in the next year. You're not going to get the credits that you once had from the federal government.
Yeah, and that goes into the calculus of people trying to lower their energy bills or, weatherize their homes or,
Yep.
switch to an electric car. And so, yeah, really clawing back those economic incentives at multiple levels, I think are really devastating to the push here to reduce
And
our
and and this is happening at a point, I said it before, but I'll say it again, where the government itself says we're facing an energy emergency. And these are things that can make that better. These are things that can, reduce energy demand on the grid and can kind of help shift us in the right direction. So it's so completely counterintuitive, but so totally and obviously political that there's there's not much that you can do to use facts and reasonable arguments to kind of turn it around. So it's hugely disappointing. And my hope, at least, is that there are things the states can do and start to figure out. And also that this might just be temporary, and we'll see what the political process will bring about, in hopefully turning these things around again. They obviously, I had this thought. So it was a couple of years ago, when the Inflation Reduction Act passed, and I remember I was watching it being voted on in the House, really just a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I forget. And was just so happy, and I was like, "Wow, this is a big deal. This changes a lot of things," and just how quickly that can turn around in a couple of years, 2 to 3 years, to be watching this vote pass and just undoing everything that did. And I felt so demoralized by that, but then was like, but wait a second. That happened so quickly in 2 to 3 years. The same thing can happen again on the other side. So, this can be a pretty um pessimistic business that I'm in the climate space. But just the idea that this turned around so quickly badly means it can turn around quickly in the good direction again.
Absolutely. The pendulum can swing the other way. We can get these things back on track. I think that's a really
Exactly.
positive and kind of hopeful note to end on because this can be pretty doom and gloomy to think about.
Yeah, that's great. Happy to end on a good note.
It's been a real pleasure having you on the show, Rob, kicking off our Region Watch series. Follow-up episodes in our Region Watch series will dive into how the Trump administration is threatening transportation policies and initiatives here in the tri-state region. And when we dive into more E&E developments, we'll be sure to have Rob back on the show. That's it for me in New York. I'm Dr. Sam Bowden Akbari.
And I'm Rob Freudenberg. Great talking to you, Sam.
Yep, this has been RPA Radio. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.
RPA Radio is produced by Sam Bowden Akbari for Regional Plan Association. Editing is by Megan McElroy. Our theme music is by Nate Dorr. Questions or comments? Email us at info@rpa.org or visit rpa.org for more.